You are listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by machinists. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Protein Machining, and this week I am very happy to welcome David Liu. How's it going, David?
Great. How's it going, Dylan?
Fantastic. So give us the lowdown. Who are you? What you do?
Okay.
You've got a couple new companies. What's been going on?
Yeah, the whole gist is I love building stuff. I love manufacturing. I can get into the story of how this all started, but what we're doing basically now is we're building a bunch of software tools to help machine shops be more productive, get more customers, basically, make more money. Having been on the side of owning a shop, I think I know what the pain points are. And the last thing I think I really want is, some really bloated ERP software. So we'll start with that. So we want to build lightweight tools that are easy to, for shops to integrate and make them productive.
And what are the companies called?
Well, the main company is actually called Brittle Fluid. And then we've developed a couple of use case. This is probably what you see on LinkedIn and some of the other social media posts that I make, where we have coin maker, we have tool trace, we have rocket brackets. And really what that all is demonstrations of the applications that really sit on the platform that we're developing, such that in the future, if you, for example, Dylan, wanted a tool trace app, let's pretend you have a CO2 laser and you want to start offering that as a service, you can literally just take a single line of HTML code and put it into your website, and all of a sudden you can offer that to your customers, right? Super easy, kind of like Shopify, if you will.
That's really cool. So is that something you've learned through past companies of like creating a lot of little test cases and kind of spinning them up as micro companies, I guess, quote unquote?
Yeah, I'm generally big on just sending it. So you make something, you test it. That's probably the best. You're gonna get signal very quickly if you go ahead and do that. We're not really building a huge science project here, so these are all lightweight tools, and especially nowadays with the advent of all these AI software development tools, it really helps our developers really quickly spool up these apps.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think I heard Jeff Bezos refer to it as like a two-way door, or like you can walk into it and you can test something, and you can always go back. Like there's very little friction to killing something off or going back through that door and being like, nope, that's not the path for me.
Yeah, actually, you use one of my favorite words, which is friction. It's one of my favorites because it's one of the things that we oftentimes, very well, owning and operating a machine shop, all the little points throughout your daily activities that just compound, right? The moment you step through the door, even before then, you're already thinking of all the things that can basically go wrong, and typically they do. And these are all little friction points that we experience, and because of who we are, we're really good at navigating and mitigating some of these. But wouldn't it be better if we could just, get rid of a lot of this stuff at will very easily with, in our case, software tools, right?
Definitely. So let's step it back because you're in software, but you do not talk like you are in software. So I think that, we've all had the LinkedIn ads, or especially lately the LLM driven emails into our inbox, and you're like, you've never made a part in your life. And I don't get that from you. So let's step it back. How did you get into manufacturing?
Yeah. So I actually went to school for mechanical engineering. Didn't practice that at all. In fact, I've never practiced as a mechanical engineer. But fun story is my very last year, when I was sitting there across the table from a hiring manager for HP, he said, listen, you should not be a mechanical engineer. I'm gonna pass your resume along, and what you're gonna end up doing is sitting behind a desk making the next printer roller for the new HP printer series, right? And maybe you should do something else with your life, because clearly you like to talk and you like people and all that. So I really took that to heart. So fast forward, I graduated with a mech-e degree, didn't do any of that, and I spent a lot of time. There's some other stories in there too, but the gist was the internet was just about to, actually was coming online, right? No pun intended, 95, 96, 97. And I saw all the new ways of doing things that I'd never seen before. And I'd written a little bit of HTML, et cetera. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. It's a new way of doing things. And that's what I wanted to be a part of. And in fact, it was it was actually one of my other managers who, at the time I was working as effectively what would you call it? At a nonprofit organization where my sole purpose was to go through and look at all the NASA Ames intellectual property in their book, and go out and meet the researchers and see if there's a way we can commercialize the technology. So I go out to NASA. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I go out to NASA Ames quite often, meet the folks and just kind of nerd out, right? Listen to the scientists tell me all the things that they've been working on. And all I'm thinking of is, how do we commercialize this? This is all great, right? This is an N of one example, N of one experiment. The world needs to see this. Let's go ahead and do that. And it was my manager.
The reverse of a patent farm almost. It's like,
almost, yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And it was my manager at the time who, upon my leaving, he gave me a magazine called The Red Herring, which is a big internet magazine at the time, and a bottle of wine and a card that basically said, here's the internet, go do that. And again, I took that to heart. So you have these two people in my life who really saw something in me that I think I was originally predestined to go be a mechanical engineer, even though my heart kind of felt like that's not really what I wanted to do, although I love engineering and I love designing and manufacturing. And I went in and did internet stuff for all intents and purposes. Met this guy out of UC Berkeley about 3 months out of my job, and he was doing internet marketing. He was creating software for internet marketing, which was a huge thing at the time. Again, brand new territory. And I joined him as, I still remember vividly, my business card said internet evangelist, and I think that's what he took to. Yeah, man, I joined him and helped him set up shop, right, in an actual office, and the build out of the office and talking to folks, building relationships with advertisers, et cetera. I'm kind of getting deep in the weeds, but the gist is that I had a whole internet run, and then the internet imploded for a little bit. And I went off and did some IT consulting, thinking, there must be a way I can, quote unquote, give back to the community somehow, right? Because that's basically what I knew. Now, I should also say that by that time, I had only taken one class in manufacturing, which really was, learn how to weld using oxyacetylene, use the Bridgeport, and we made a little gyroscope. And that was effectively it. Read a simple print, and we had to draw things out and learn a little bit of welding, buffing, machining, simple stuff, right? When I look at it now, it's super easy. But back then, it just kind of went in one ear, went out the other, and I just went through the motion. But around, after the internet tanked for the first round, and I did my IT consulting and helped out some nonprofits in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then I realized what I wanted to do was actually do something with my hands. I mean, I've always known I love building stuff. So rented a little 100 square foot office space. It was actually smaller than that, probably half the size of a typical bathroom, really, residential bathroom in the United States. Yep. It was on the second story of a bar and grill called Zeke's, 3rd and Brandon Street in San Francisco. And I literally just set up shop. I had my IT rack and servers, and I was just kind of computing, looking around, and just wondering what I was going to do next, basically. And somehow I think I stumbled upon Practical Machinist. By the way, Practical Machinist then and now.
A little different.
Yeah, a little different, but kind of the same. And so fast forward, I went to Harbor Freight one day, bought a little X2 mini mill. And this was, I think, the early to mid 2000s. So it was after the dot-com crash. I got to Harbor Freight and very innocently asked the store clerk, what drill bits to buy. I mean, literally, I knew nothing. Okay, so yeah,
I'm sure he didn't know much either.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, what happened was, I'm upstairs, kind of toiling away, trying to figure out what I wanted to do next in this little sports bar and grill, and I just thought, visit practical machinists and all these other forums. And I really wanted to, something about CNC really, interested me. And so I thought, well, I can't really, how am I going to do this thing? I know nothing, right? And I ended up going to Harbor Freight. And by this time, I had known about the X2 mini mill, the Sile mini mill, or the Sieg mini mill, rather. I drive myself down to the Harbor Freight, pick up a mini mill, and I asked, very innocently to the clerk, what drill bit should I get? What vise? Like, how do I hold the material? Where do I get the material? I mean, I literally knew nothing. And so that was an interesting journey, right? And I remember, I'll tell you, this is not too many people know this, but even before I bought a bandsaw, you might know where this is going. I'm trying to, make the material smaller, and I'm there with a hand drill and drill bits, and I'm literally I'm like sectioning this thing off, and then going in with a metal, with a metal bandsaw. So interesting times. Suffice to say, I've learned a lot. Still, there's a whole lot left to learn, but man, those early days were interesting. And then I get kicked out of actually before then. so I buy this desktop mini mill, and at the time there was one website. I don't know if it's still on now, but I want to say it was Five Bears or something like that. And this person was building from the ground up a 5-axis CNC mill.
Really?
Yeah, it was pretty sweet. But he stopped somewhere, in between the third and the fourth axis, I think it was, and it just
oh no,
that was it. So I'm out there constantly looking for information. I thought, well, let me go ahead and I'll just do what I can. I find this kit called Xylotex. I put it together. This is around the days, I think, Mach 2.0. Art Fenerty, shout out to Art. Thank you for being a part of this story. And converted the mill, the X2 mini mill, to CNC, and then wrote up, because I like to document things too. I took a lot of pictures and wrote a BOM, and basically published a PDF book on how to do this yourself, so you can convert your own X2 mini mill. And this is also pre-Tormach days. So it was an interesting time, and I remember, so one of the things here is like, this is all a hobby, but how do you make money doing any of this stuff, right? Because you got to live. And so
right.
I remember, I think Google AdSense at the time was still relatively new. Didn't pay much attention to it, but I did put one ad on the homepage at the time and ignored it for about a month. Came back to it and realized, there's $10 in here, or whatever the number was. And me doing the mental calculus, thinking, I have 100 some odd pages, $10 a month, or $10 for this one particular ad. Well, let me just smother the entire website with ads, right? Yeah, very, very, very linear thinking there. Yeah, and then that basically doing that particular thing afforded me, very at least enough money where I can do a little more travel and go visit shops, and so I just leaned in. I basically said, well, whoever's going to let me into their shop, I want to learn, I want to see. Then that's when I started to go to the various trade shows. We started out, I think, in the Southern California at West Tech.
Mm-hmm.
And then slowly, it took a while for me to discover EMO, for example, but IMTS was obviously still very big. And I found myself over there in IMTS and was just enamored by all the stuff, right? All the machines, all the people who were in the industry building things and making stuff, which even to this day, I find, fascinating. And that's what I want to support ultimately. And so, the hobby turned into a business, and I started to buy bigger and bigger machines. There's stories in there too about my very first Fadal. I buy this Fadal off of eBay, and everything worked fine. I plug it in, all of a sudden I blow up a circuit, right? Because I miswired the transformer, like little things like that, right? Yeah, lots of trial and error.
Trial by fire, yeah.
Trial by fire, yeah.
So I've got two questions to go back real quick. First off, before college and all of that, were you always you're such a people person? I think anybody who's ever met you knows that you love to not only talk, but like really dive in with someone and ask questions and find out about them. Were you always like that? Were you like that in high school? And because it sounds like, you've always been technical, but I think that knowing you, like your superpower, yes, is the technical side, but it's also the people side.
Yeah. I think when I was much younger, I probably paid less attention to that. But there is an origin story there, which I think might have contributed. When I was a kid, when I was in preschool, I think it was, I remember, this is, I think, when Star Wars first came out or was around, so, dates me a little bit. But so there I am on the playground, and this kid had a Chewbacca action figure. And that's what I wanted. But, I didn't, my parents didn't buy me one. Maybe I didn't ask who, I don't remember that part. But I remember racing this kid, across the playground for the Chewbacca action figure. And halfway through, this dude tripped me. And so fell flat on my face with blood. I'm crying, all this stuff. Right. And I think it was that particular moment. And clearly I remember it now. I think that particular moment in time really cemented for me that, hey, well, people can be jerks, right? By the way, I would have won. I think I was winning at the time. At least that's
right.
What I remember.
Well, that's why he tripped you, of course.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Is that, kind of a crappy thing to do, but there must have been a reason. That in itself is a curious moment for me. Like, what would have motivated you to do something like that? And then likewise, for the more positive moments, what motivates people to do things? I think that's really the big question I like to ask folks and to learn more about, because when you um, when you learn more about folks, you really basically know how to help them.
For that to come at such a young age is really, really interesting. And I think, like I said, I do think that that's your superpower. Like knowing you and hearing you talk about your projects and other people's projects, it's always been really, really cool to see how quickly you can engender like friendship with people. I've seen you at IMTS and like the Fusion Summit and all of that. And like, I've never seen you by yourself. Like, not that I don't think you can be alone, but that like you can find a friend anywhere. And I think that is really quite amazing.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I mean, I do like my alone time, to be clear.
Don't we all? Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really cool. So my other question was, once you got that Harbor Freight mill, how long did it take for that bar and grill to be real sick of you and kick you out of that space?
Yes, great question. I think it was New Year's Eve of some, I had server racks and I had basically computers going full bore inside there, and I had machinery and all this stuff. And I had my window open, and it was New Year's Eve. I remember this vividly because the day after, right, New Year's Day, I get an email from my landlords, and they basically said, "Hey, you left the window open." It was raining, right? That was a piece of detail there. So it was raining, and by the way, we entered into your space, and you have a lot of stuff in here. And they were right. I mean, I had 5 or 6 Craftsman cabinets just chock full of stuff, right? Very disorganized, by the way. This is pre-tool trace days. And so
good plug. I like it.
Yeah, thank you. I had all this crap in there, and I think they were right. By that time I had the X2 mini mill. I had the 7x12 little Harbor Freight mill as well, or the lathe. And I had 8x12 in there. Just a bunch of stuff. It was very, very dense. And I think by then I also had a 4x6 bandsaw, by the way.
Jeez.
Yeah, in that space.
That's wild.
Yeah. So it was a good thing. They called me out and they said, "Hey, you're no longer welcome here. It's probably a little dangerous being on the second floor, all this dense, metal." Yeah. So I got kicked out. And then I, put all my stuff in storage, and then put an ad in Craigslist looking for shop mates. And I would say it took a couple months. And one day I get this email from this guy, and he says, "Hey, we're interested." I think I told them I was a machinist. Far from it, by the way. Okay. They said, "Hey, we're looking to set up shop. We'd love to share space. We're a consulting firm doing rocket stuff." And so we meet at the little Starbucks down the street one day, and I'm standing at that time, by the way, I used to wear, Hawaiian shirts and shorts and sandals. That was super chill mode. And yes, thank you. It was a very comfortable time. At least my clothing. And I look from across the street, and I see these two dudes walk across. And I don't know if you've ever pictured what a rocket scientist looks like. But they looked exactly like that. And okay. So sure enough, they crossed the street, they introduced themselves, and we ended up sharing space. So we basically we shared space together for a couple of different locations as we, grew bigger and bigger. I started to get more and more stuff naturally, bigger and bigger equipment. Then we finally, we moved to one place that I call the soapbox, because there used to be a soap manufacturing place, and it smelled like that for ages. Really, it smelled like that for 2 years while we were still in there. It smelled
That's
like
so cool.
Yeah, it was a very interesting. San Francisco. If folks have not been, especially during the kind of internet times, the original .com, and then I guess pre-2008, and then even nowadays, right? You see there are a lot of software companies, or a lot of high-tech companies doing all sorts of stuff. It's no surprise, right? But to see the myriad companies kind of coalesce in this one little small geographical area is quite magical. And so anyway, long story short, that's when I finally end up getting the Fadal. And I remember we were at a cafe, and this will actually, funny thing, like, I don't know if you believe in how that the universe actually does work in a very interesting, magical way. So we're there at a coffee shop, myself and 2 of my friends who were much better machinists, and had taught me the ways of non-craftsman, i.e. more Lista cabinetry, more German, Swiss machinery, right? They really planted the seed because up until then I was dealing with all import stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I could afford. And so I'm sitting there at the cafe and I sniped my Fadal. It's VMC 20 out of IDEO, it's the industrial design shop here in the Bay Area. And I'm sitting there drinking coffee, and then all of a sudden I hear the snipe ring. I think it was Auction Sniper or whatever it was. And I saw that I'd won the mill. Okay, now mind you, I had also previewed this. I knew it was a good machine. Like, it worked. It came out of a clean facility. They were switching over to Haas's from Fadal's, kind of sign of the times as well. And dude, my heart sank. I couldn't, it was part excitement and part nervousness because I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
Right.
Right. Up until then, everything plugged into a regular residential outlet. I could move it myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I went in on that, figure out how to do, figure out which riggers to get to do this thing, everything on a budget. And we bring the Fadal into this soapbox space, this shared warehouse space. I remember being so nervous about wiring things up. I didn't know anything about three-phase power. I mean, heavy power, right? Again, anything over 110, 120. That's number one. And I remember opening up the electrical enclosure and just seeing, aside from the wires going, all the drives, et cetera, I just saw like the power tap wires. And my gut told me I should do something about it, but I said, I'm going to send it. So I plug it in, turn the machine on. I can't even remember it anymore. S1000M3, I program everything in MDI, start the spindle. That part's fine. And then I go ahead and stop the spindle. And then all of a sudden, if I remember correctly, I hear something. I'd certainly smelled something. I mean, it smelled like, the...
Yeah, you let the magic smoke out.
I all know what
that smells like. Yeah.
So I had to get a new brake resistor. It was not a big deal, right? And then, but these are all little points in my life where really I think I learn better when I can actually do. And I can get a lot of information, obviously, especially from the internet, et cetera. But there's no better way for me, at least, to learn than to actually get my hands dirty, as they say, right? And asking a lot of questions.
Isn't that the worst, though? Like, I feel like that is the machinist way, and so many of us have to make the same mistakes over and over. Like, I know I have been told, don't do that. It's going to go badly. And I'm like, yeah. Like, I'm a special snowflake, and it will be fine for me. And then I have to learn that mistake,
Right. Yeah. I had this stainless job, and I read the data sheets, and I'm thinking, I'm just drilling a hole, right? It's 3/16 hole or whatever. It's big enough, and I'm just going to send it. I'm going to ramp up the RPMs and just go. And dude, I remember seeing the drill bit get piping red hot and then literally just dissolving itself, into the material.
Oh yeah.
That was an interesting time.
Oh boy. So at that point, when you had the Fadal, how much of your, maybe not income, but like, were you more machinist than IT, or like, what was the split there?
Yeah, I was still basically living off of Google AdSense and these books that I was publishing. And I decided, okay, so this company that I shared office space with, by the way, they ended up becoming this company called Astra Rocket Company. So the founders of, they've done what they're doing, which is good. But when they were still in the infancy, when they were still a consultancy, one of their engineers, and he'll know who he is if he ever listens, he asked me one day, just kind of very similarly, what is it exactly that you do? Because you come in here and you're playing around with machines, you're doing stuff, and you're clearly doing IT things, and you're talking to folks all the time, but can't quite figure it out. And so in a way, he egged me on to set up shop. And, it was easier for me to set up websites back then. I guess nowadays with, GoDaddy or whatever, it's super easy. But based on that one conversation, I registered a domain name, set up shop. And then literally, because I'd also, to your point, people in the neighborhood generally knew who I was. And I told them I was, using machines and kind of tinkering around. They started to come over and ask me to do things like drill holes, cut things and help them engineer their inventions, what have you. And so that's really when the hobby turned into a business.
Okay.
And,
It was kind of I'll show you. I'm not playing anymore kind of thing.
Yeah, it's maybe I'm very predictable that way. It's probably really easy to, get me to do certain things. Just you can't do it. Okay, well, we'll see.
Yeah, all right, I'll do it then. That's fine. That's great. Okay. And you, like, actually on a previous episode we talked about location, whether it was something very necessary for a business, and I think that that's somewhere where location really, really helps you. It's like you were smack dab in the middle of innovation and people trying to turn ideas into reality.
Yep, indeed. Yes. In San Francisco, that's where I was at the time. I think we had maybe 5 actual quote unquote machine shops. And what that means is, when you go in there, this is industrial equipment, right? People are talking to the likes of Sandvik, Kennametal, whatever, right? They're using like industrial tools, industrial tooling, industrial machines that cut. Not to dismiss, the hobby and tinker folks, but it's just a different kind of a different strata of manufacturing.
Totally.
And I was one of a handful, and I focused on quick turn. That's just that's generally how my mind works anyway. You have a problem, let's fix it, let's solve it.
Right. Yeah. So how quickly did things progress from there? When did you get your next machine? How did you grow that company? How'd that go?
The Fadal was actually the centerpiece, right? This is a little 20 by 16 travel. Didn't have power tap, no rigid tapping, right? It was a really kind of, I wouldn't say it was a clapped out machine, but it was on its way out. And then I bought a Mori. I think I bought it was a SL2H, Moriseke SL2H on auction. So that was my 3-axis mill, 2-axis lathe. My fun fact, after I moved out, because I was getting so much stuff and kind of expanding my territory, I found a little warehouse that was now mine, at 1,500 square feet, fairly small, and that's which I believe is really the perfect size, by the way, for anybody to get started. It's like just the sweet spot, right, to prove things out. And it was in the same city block as the other place where we were, the soapbox shop. Terrible floors. I remember that vividly. Walked in, it was basically a tin can of a structure. No AC, no environmental controls. It was hot, it was cold, very drafty. The floors were terrible. I set a laser in there before I moved in, actually, and I found it was basically a 1-foot deviation from the front to the back. Yeah.
Oh, that's bad.
Yeah, and the machines, we're sitting on probably 3-4 inch slabs that were pretty outdated and needed a lot of shimming. My Fadal needed some shimming.
I bet. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I was basically doing that and some fabrication as well. I basically just taken on really any kind of work that interested me, quite frankly, but that would also pay the bills, right? To be super clear. Mm-hmm. So I really turned this into more of a, for all intents and purposes, more of a consultancy with manufacturing capability than an actual machine shop where I'm bidding and hoping for the next, big job that's just going to print money. Although I was aware of that interested me less.
So were you more doing like go-to-market kind of stuff, or just like, hey, you have an idea, let's make your first prototype? Like, what were your ideal customers at that point?
I was gonna joke and say the ones who pay. I talked to a lot of inventors, a lot of hardware startups in their super nascent days, and I found myself, because I like people and I like sharing ideas, and I like talking about ideas. I love the future, right? Love the future stuff. And I would spend a lot of time, right, non-billable time, doing this kind of work. And then I realized one day, it's really hard for me to not be nice. But at some point in time, I got time is money, seriously, right?
Right.
And so, sorry, what was the question again?
Like, what was your ideal customer? And I guess to tag on there, how did you find them? Like, this was not. I think that we kind of live in a kind of a golden age of finding these people. Like, you go on Instagram and you can just like type in a few hashtags and you're like, oh yeah, these are the kind of people that I want to start marketing to. But back then you didn't have these resources. So what was your customer looking like and how did you find them?
It was through word of mouth. I would also go to Berkeley. I'd go to Stanford, due to proximity, and I would join their, I guess their engineering design labs. And just tell them, hey, I have a machine shop. right? And most of the time, they don't really know what kind of stuff you have anyway. They just know that, hey, there's a place I can go to with a problem if I need something made. And so it was mostly through that. I do remember, by the way, side note, because we know each other effectively through Instagram, right? That's how this all started. I think my first post was 2015. So, it took me a while to even get on there, but I thought, oh, that's interesting. There are a lot of, super smart folks out there doing really cool stuff. And again, I'm very visual. So to be able to see all that stuff, I think also helped me be a better machinist.
Oh, totally. Right? Yeah. I still learn so much from Instagram, but especially in the very beginning, because we started Protium in 2015, and that was mind blowing. Like, I was working in a dirty, dusty shop, and then seeing like everything under the sun just right there, learning everything. It was amazing.
Yeah, I think you and I met it was one of the first IMTS get-togethers, or I forget what it's called now, right?
I think it was the 2016 IMTS.
Oh, yeah. That's wild. Yeah, and I still remember you were talking. See, this is what I'm talking about, right? This kind of stuff gets me super jazzed, right? You see folks just going out there and getting it done. In the context of manufacturing, even better. Right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And here we are, shooting the breeze, on a podcast.
I know. 10 years later, it's crazy.
Oh my God. Yeah. That's wild.
Yeah. All right. So then, you're making stuff for inventors. How did you grow the shop from there? Or were you, I guess, how long did it take for you to like grow it to the point where I'm guessing you got bored. It seems like
yes,
you are very much like you love to be at the cutting edge of stuff. And so let's get to that part of the story, I guess. Like, how did you grow it? I know at one point you had a 5-axis, you were doing some more advanced stuff. So how do we get there?
So I got kicked. I didn't get kicked out. Well, I got kicked out. So the building I was in, finally they decided to sell it. I had first right of refusal to buy it, and I got the loans and I got everything dialed in. And it was this basically an SBA loan to buy the building, right? And I knew I had to pour work into all this. And during what they call the phase one environmental assessment, I think it's what's called, the bank forces that on you. They had found someone who was doing their homework, went on the internet and found literally a Yellow Pages scan that called out, had the name of the shop where I was at the time. And what they were doing was effectively chrome plating for the naval shipyard, et cetera.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So,
well, that's the death knell for any kind of SBA loan right there.
Exactly. And I kind of knew something was up, because you can still see evidence in the terrible floors. Like, you would see drain pipes 1.5, 2 inch diameter drain pipes go straight down, and it looked like it was at the time must have had one of those those galvanized outdoor tubs that you see people, soak in or what have you. Mm-hmm. It looked like that. So I figured, that's probably where they're doing all the stuff and just disposing right into the dirt.
Oh,
yeah. Not great.
Bummer.
So, that basically I had the opportunity to do a phase 2 that, would require that I actually do some soil samples, et cetera. And I was paying all of this out of pocket. And I figured, this is getting a little expensive here. And everybody around me, there's certain times in my life when I listened to outside advice, and this was one of them. They said, we've done this before, and you never know what you're going to find. So if you have deep pockets, go for it. Otherwise, maybe you should just cut bait. So that's what I did. And at the time, trying to find office warehouse space in San Francisco proper was, as you can imagine, so it's always challenging. If you have deep enough pockets, not a big deal, but that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, I'm going to go across the Bay Bridge to a little city called Emeryville. Now, Emeryville is a tiny incorporated town that sits between Berkeley and Oakland, home to big companies such as Pixar. So, it is a thing, right? Mm-hmm. And I find a space over there, and I literally remember the moment I stepped foot, it felt like I was in the Truman Show, because everything was so quiet, clean, well manicured. And I liked it. So move into a space there, and I had all the same equipment, right? Still servicing the same customers. They knew where I was, and I was still making parts. And I remember, so right around this time, this is 2014, it must have been 2015 because this is emo cycle. So I fly to emo, and I think it was probably my first time at the show. And DMG Mori, big marketing agency basically. And I go in there, and I'm in their hall, not even a booth. I'm in their hall.
Right, because they have an entire hall at emo.
Yeah, it was big. And I spent the entire day there just, geeking out at all the machinery, looking at how everything was done as well. I mean, just the presentation, I think a lot of us can learn from. And so I spent an entire day there and realized, well, this is all great. This is only DMG Mori. What about everybody else? And so I go, and I was at this time I had done enough schooling where I knew what mill turns were, all the various kinematic ways of moving machines around or moving the head around. And I thought, well, there's this thing called the Intergrex. It's super cool. It's mill turn type of thing. Let me go find out more about this. And Mazak, as you probably know, right, is just like that's what they're known for. So amongst other things, so I find my way over to the Mazak hall. This is Germany, so they're looking for folks. If I speak English, they're going to try to match me up with an English salesperson. And I got matched up with Brian Papke. So at the time, he was the president CEO of Mazak US. And
oh, wow.
And I remember this is wild. He literally, he didn't say very much, right? Maybe just me, I'm talking, all this energy, et cetera. And he has a very methodical, slow kind of, I don't know, like a Midwest vibe about him, right? Love it. And he walks me over and says, "Hey, have you taken a look at this?" And literally kind of does his presentation and shows me the right, I forget, it was whatever model was, probably the 200 Intergrex. And that was basically it. And so right then and there, I realized, oh, this is cool. This person's very approachable. This company is clearly, big and well represented as well. And at the time, the other thing I was basically looking for a machine at this time because I knew 3-axis, 2-axis, run of the mill, no pun intended, standard fare stuff doesn't get me very far. And plus, it was not to say I knew everything, but it was starting to get a little, kind of the same.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted something more fun. So I go back to the States and I get introduced to my Northern California sales rep, and we become, fast friends. And all of a sudden, one day he calls me up. So he calls me up and says, "Hey, when are you going to buy one of these machines?" Right? In a very friendly way. We're just kind of back and forth, right? He's kind of joking a little bit. And I said, "Well, I'll just buy one right now." Completely on a whim. Yeah. I mean, by the way, I knew what the down payment was. I mean, we kind of talked a little bit about what was all involved. And so I literally, as he's on the phone with me, I'm hopping on my, in my bank account online, looking to make sure I have enough money to cover the deposit. And I said, "Come on by." And I don't think, I actually do think he thought I was joking because I
think any salesman would. Well, yeah, I'll just do it right now. It's fine.
Right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, very much to how I operate. It's like, yeah, I see it. Let's do it. Right. Why wait? And yes, we can do it. So he shows up I don't know, half an hour later, I cut him out a check and, we shoot the breeze a little bit and he takes off. And that's how I ended up with the Variaxis from Mazak. The other reason, by the way, this is also super important. You talk about relationships and I think it's, we're all trying to do the best we can. Right. And so you don't always see that side of people and, timing isn't always right. And so, but to me, when I buy equipment, it's really important I know who's behind the equipment. Meaning if I pick up the phone and call, I want to be able to talk to the person who can help me solve that problem. And hopefully you'll do your best. And I know things fall through the cracks, but what I don't want to do is play telephone game to try to resolve something. And so Mazak at the time was direct. I think they still are direct sales, at least in Northern California. So that was important to me. I looked at all the other players, right? DMG, and all the other ones. And most of them went through distributors. Nothing wrong with that. I just wanted, it was my very first machine. I wanted it to land, and start making parts. And so super important that I had direct access. And so that around that time, before I bought the mill, the other consideration was, and I know you talk about hypermill quite frequently, especially nowadays, right? And all the CAM learning, et cetera. And the other thing that was really important was when this machine lands, I didn't know anything about 5-axis. I'd never programmed. I never really ran any of this stuff. I just saw it in, fancy trade shows and it looked cool. But now when this machine lands, I want to be able to start making parts. And we had some parts that definitely could have used at least the fourth. And so that's also when I got hooked up with Esprit at the time. This is pre-Hexagon, right? So there's, again, 2015, 2014, 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And right around that time, they were, and I think this was also at EMO where I met the president of Esprit. And I asked him something that I think everybody here is going to appreciate, which was, hey, what I want to be able to do is make impellers. Right?
And I'm sure he was just like, yeah. Okay, buddy.
Yeah. And, to be clear, I have not made very many impellers since then. I can still count them on my hand, and none of them are all very good. So, when I talked to him, he said, he did the usual, yeah, we can do it. And I even asked some super naive questions like, hey, I want to do this linking thing where, the table, my vocabulary back then was still very, very, I was still learning a lot, still to this day. But back then, I didn't even have the proper terminology. And all I said was, all the things I saw at the show where they're cutting impellers or all these kind of fancy parts, I want to do the simultaneous motions. I want to do a lot of stuff too. So long as your software can do that, the moment the machine lands, then I'm in. And right around that time, they were going from the 2000 series of Esprit into what they call, I think, the TNG, the new next generation, or at least the acronym was TNG. And they had a Mazak guy in there who was really the pro, post-processing, everything about the Mazak, Esprit duality, much like, I guess, Haas and Fusion 360 as an example. And I really, again, because of that person, because of the technical know-how from this one individual who knew everything about it, that's one of the major reasons I went in with that particular pairing. Hypermill was super cool too. I would have gone Hypermill, but they just didn't quite, at the time, have the answers for that.
Oh, totally. Yeah. You got to, I think at the end of the day, like you said, it's all about the relationship.
Yeah.
Like, especially when you start getting into more expensive machinery and software and all of that, like, I'm okay with something not working quite right as long as I can talk to somebody who will help me fix it.
Yeah.
And that's really what it if I have something break, please be out here in the next day or two. That's all I can ask for.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah. It's, and we, in this industry, we talk so much about, everybody complains about stuff, myself included, right? This particular vendor, they didn't do us right by this or what have you. And really, everybody's doing their best. That I believe. I think there are a few people out there who are just generally terrible. But for the most part, we're all doing our best, trying to help each other out. We have our own stuff to deal with. And so, if I go with one particular vendor over another, it's really just because we're in sync at the same time, right? We're on the same wavelength. Not to say that you were terrible or someone else, it's none of that really. I was talking to someone the other day about this. Like, I was just a small prototype shop, and Sandvik came over, right? And just hung out and showed me some tools. And I ended up buying from them, obviously, because it was super easy for me. That's the other thing about going back to the friction concept. They made it easy for me to buy their product.
Yep.
Take my money, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's crazy how difficult it can be to get things done sometimes. Like that, I buy so much stuff from McMaster, knowing full well that I'm paying the McMaster tax because I can buy today, it'll show up tomorrow. No fuss, no muss. I don't have to follow up with anybody. It's just done.
Yeah,
like amazing.
That's right. Yeah.
So I'm right there with you.
Yeah, wow. This is, we're going all over the place. It feels, yeah. Chronologically, yeah, this is still had my shop.
Mm-hmm. You made your trays.
Made my trays. Oh yeah. Again, I like to just do cool stuff really. And
so where did that come from? Like that? Because that was, I think, maybe my first introduction to you. Like, I think I had seen you commenting on people's stuff or whatever. Yeah. And then you posted those and I was like, oh, that's rad.
Yeah.
And, I think you brought one to IMTS and I saw it there. Where did that even come from?
I just wanted something to cut. So I was there CADing something up, and it just looked cool to me. And I remember because I wanted the table to do some stuff, and then one of the things I thought was technically cool was the way I held the part on op 2, basically. So I think what I did was the very first op I just held in, by the way, Lang vices, right? The moment there's certain things along your journey where once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Self-centering vices at the time was like, oh my God, what have I been doing all this time, right? So total evangelist there. And I remember, grabbing it and then doing the first op, which is basically the inside, the tray side of things. And I was wondering, well, how, this is all basically, imagine like an oval if people haven't seen it. It's effectively shaped like an oval on top, and then on the bottom side, there are spikes that come out. They look like pyramids, effectively. And so after the first op, I'm thinking, well, how am I going to hold this thing? And so that was part of the reason for introducing, a little bit of a draft angle on the inside, was so I can stick a wedge in there and expand it out and grab it. And so that was just a fun time, And I thought, well, if I'm making this thing, maybe I'll see if I can, going back to how I generally think about things, like, test quickly, develop something, throw up a website, send it out there, see if it sticks.
And you sold some? Like, I feel like, I can't remember, but I feel like Rob probably has one.
Does he?
Maybe Amish, or like, I'm sure there's a handful of floating around in the community.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, and thank you for supporting. I appreciate that. Which is also another thing. And there's so many, I mean, not only just talented designers of making all sorts of stuff. I mean, we know generally the same folks making the different variations of pocket knives, or the box cutters, or by the way, I'm not naming names, not intentionally, but I just know there are a lot of names to mention. So it's easy if I just kind of keep it in the abstract, right?
Oh yeah.
But there's just so many. I was at a Fusion, one of the DSI Fusion things not too long ago, and I saw Ben, with the flashlights, and I said, dude, let me just buy one of these things from you, because I want to not only support, but I think it's just cool, right? And there's so many people in the community just doing stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
building cool stuff. And if I can support, I clearly will.
Yeah, yep. It's fantastic. I very often, if I want something like a pen or something like that, like first place is like, oh, let me look at who's in the community making something like that. Because like, why would I go anywhere else if I can support a friend? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, there are really a lot of talented folks out there. And what's funny is I look at like, much like people in general, we have folks who are the designers who know how to operate the machinery to make the thing. We have the folks who are, who just want to do production, right? They geek out over the millisecond, right? Operationally efficient, all that. And then you have the folks who see things in a different light, like, oh, this is great, but I think software is going to help solve it, or whatever. And the whole point is, I just love that we all collectively are in this industry of just making stuff and seemingly helping each other, which I also appreciate. So even the folks, I've heard some of your podcasts in the past where, sometimes we like to, rip on certain individuals who are very vocal about the industry.
Who could you be possibly talking?
Yeah. I'm not going to name any names here, but all in all, we need more of it. I've been spending more and more time on X lately for various reasons, but one of them is trying to see what's happening out there. What's the general consensus on the state of manufacturing, the state of machining, or factories, et cetera, right? Just like the U.S. Focused activities in the making of things, and you see clearly more of that, right? Sometimes it gets a little overly political, but what I find interesting is that we're starting to see more awareness about the lack of manufacturing ability, capability, right? And one of the things, at least for me, that I want to do is, I enjoy this a lot. I want to support, again, as much as I can. I do believe that, I can maybe make a better tool or make a better machine or something like that, but I don't think that's going to really move the needle. And I think this is a little bit going back to what we're working on, is I think the thing that we actually fundamentally are lacking is what I'm seeing on the X platform is a lot of these software first machine shops or software focused manufacturing type folks who, really come from this. We all want the same thing, but they're really looking at the bits as opposed to the atoms like we do, right? And there's a place for that. Now there's some stuff out there that I think is maybe not necessary, or have you ever tried selling into a machine shop? Because I don't think this is going to work out very well, but have at it, right?
Yeah.
But all that's to say, the more eyes on this industry is what we need. We should do more of it. Support each other.
Totally. Yeah, I think the general populace sentiment is like a trailing 10 or 15 years from the industry. Like we've all known for 10 plus years that like this is US manufacturing has died and needs a rebirth. And it's only seemingly in the last, 3-4 years maybe that like you could talk to a normal person outside of the industry and they're like, yeah, we really need to like actually make things here. And we don't know how to do that anymore. Like even Smarter Every Day just came out with a new video talking about that yesterday or the day before, how he's making this grill brush now and the struggles he went through to try to make every part of it in the US. Like it was nearly impossible, if not impossible for him.
What do you think, to that end, how do you collectively, how can we help everyone here not only gain more awareness, but really just to bring more folks, not even into the trade specifically, but just into manufacturing, just be a part of this ecosystem? How do we do that?
I think it starts with, it's really tough because I think we need to like change the way that we talk about manufacturing. Like throughout my entire school career, like it was a blue collar job and it was dirty and it sucked. And like they so heavily pushed people into college for so long that it just made all the trades look terrible. And we've got a really, an uphill battle of changing that sentiment with people of I want to go back and tell 10-year-old Dylan, like, this is so cool. You get to play with, super advanced robots every day and cut metal and turn it into jewelry to send to customers. Like, this is the coolest thing you could possibly do. And it's really just, I think that's the uphill battle. And that's the side of people we're not talking about. But like, I love that there is more eyes coming on the industry because of YouTube videos and all of that. Like, and I think we just need to keep doing that. And I just hope that we can kind of turn it around pretty quickly.
Yeah. What do you think if we were to, let's assume we can never go back to that golden age. This is also something very top of mind, especially in this past week or so, where I'm thinking, we've all seen the dirty shops. We've all seen the clean shops. We've all seen the homegrown, organically grown, as well as the VC funded, right? We have friends who are working at the particular place we're talking about in El Segundo or, down south. How do we build up something? How do we continue to support what we have now? Not be dismissive about it, really support in any way that we can, right? You need more jobs. We're going to help you get more jobs. You need more actual parts to make. Let me call up a buddy of mine and see if they can help support you. You need more, folks. Well, let me go invest some money into the local, vocational school if they need it, right? Or hire the people out of there. What I'm getting at is like, if we can never go back to that golden age, how do we build up from today on forward? How do we build a new way of looking at this industry visually, such that it's more appealing or at least palatable to the mass audience, right? Where the dirty machine shop is no longer a thing. Like, literally show them enough images of a new, super clean, super cool kind of hip vibe thing where everybody's serving coffee or whatever. And, how do we do that?
I think it's tough. Yeah, I think I'm not quite sure how to do that. I think if we had that answer, we'd be doing it already. There's enough people putting money into this that we all know that we need to do this. I would love to start seeing schools, even like in elementary school, having some sort of making or design introduced. There's always like Tinkercad and stuff like that. And they're forcing, just shoving screen time down these kids' throat anyway. And it's like, man, at least use it for something cool. Have them design something and throw it at the school 3D printer, or I think introducing making again to kids at large is what we need to do. Is because I would say most people immediately brighten up when they make something, when they design and make something from scratch.
Yep.
And I don't know how we do that. Like, I don't know if that's, we need to fund 3D printers for all these schools. I don't know how we turn, I mean, even something like your company, Rocket Brackets, being able to just say, hey, draw something that you want cut out and we'll do it. Like, one thing I've talked about doing with my wife's class is just doing like keychains and going into her class and kind of doing a little presentation on like, this is what manufacturing is, and then giving them all a sheet of like a blown up keychain and saying, draw whatever you want, turning into a DXF, and then just lasering it on the keychain that I mill really quickly.
Right.
And then they all get something back and they're like, that was my design that I just drew, a week ago or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. There's an app for that.
Right.
That's the future, right? There's an app for that. Yeah, a long time ago, there used to be a place called Tech Shop, which is one of these maker community membership based facilities where you can go use machines. Tormach was there, the standard fare, bridge boards, lathes, et cetera, engine lathes. And I used to teach a CNC class there. Part of it was, top of funnel, right? Trying to, hey, we're a machine shop if you need extra help. But also I really wanted to help the folks. And invariably, every one of those classes, the introductory class is introduction to CNC. And then we take them and show them the Tormach and, simple G code, et cetera, and explain the entire workflow. And the very first question typically is, why are you all, what do you guys do? Why are you here? And I don't remember the percentage. I want to say 90% or more, but basically everybody there throughout the entire day sat behind a computer. They were all computer programmers. And their answer was, I sit behind a desk all day long. I look at the screen. I don't get to do anything with my hands. I don't see anything tangible. At the end of the day, it's just, just another 0 and 1, basically. And that really hit home that there are a lot of folks out there that we just don't hear from who actually want this exposure, but we have to make it accessible. Now, talking about accessibility and the messaging, I do think it is important. I'll stand on my soapbox for a second. I think it's important that we send I don't want to say the right message, but we want to at least send alternate versions of the same message presented by different people in industry. Because right now we are so heavily leaning on, go big style, like let's just drive a CNC machine as fast as we can, right? And luckily we have some folks, the same folks we know who are doing super high precision, delicate work, making watches, for example, and showcasing that there's a different way of doing things, right? This industry is filled of all sorts of folks, just like the world is. And we all have our different interests, et cetera. And that this industry is not made up of 100% of these folks who, go big. If you get what I'm saying.
Oh, I completely agree. I think that's how you capture more people. Because like you said, I think that there's a lot of people who will see videos like that and go, I want nothing to do with that. But then they go look at like a video from Josh Hacko and they're like, oh, that kind of like intricacy really scratches that itch. And like, I want to do that.
Totally.
And I think that if we don't present, like, manufacturing is not just one flavor, no matter how you look at it. And I think that I would love to see more people putting out content, because it really is like you can find something that scratches that itch. If you want to make something, there is a flavor for you in manufacturing, guaranteed.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, so we continue to publicize more and more things, show people what we can do, support the local schools where we can. There's a fun fact. There's I call him a kid, but there's this guy that we hired out of literally through one of the Instagram posts that I saw. This is, our friend over at Laney College, and he posted pictures of all the folks in his class, showing the very first part they made. And I was kind of scrolling through one day and I said, this guy looked, it's probably terrible for me to say, but I said, this guy looks like, a humble, willing to learn, just wants to get after it. And so I messaged Adam and said, hey, who's this? I want to talk to this guy. And when, so I actually did bring him on to the previous company. So there's some events that happened here, after the machine shop. I went to 2 other hardware startups. We can talk about that in a minute. And but I plucked this kid out of this vocational program, and my first question was, okay, well, how are we going to make sure this person stays? And well, generally money talks, so we have to make sure we compensate well enough. That's the other thing. It drives me nuts when I hear, like, I understand, right? We have to run a business, and there's only so much you can generally pay, but man, you want to do your best to just jack that number up as high as possible. And so after this guy left the previous company where I worked and managed their machine shop and manufacturing, and then coming over to this startup, founding the startup, I wanted to bring him along. He was available, so I wanted to bring him along. And my first question to myself was, well, what am I going to pay this guy, right? And so first thought was, well, what's McDonald's paying? What's, what are all the entry-level jobs require? Very trainable skills, but it doesn't require, any sort of heavy degree. How do we compensate? How do we compensate well enough here? And so I looked at all the burger places, right? They're paying $20. I think the state of California's minimum wage is 15 something dollars an hour. Long story short, I thought, well, okay, if he doesn't like it here and we pay the same that he can get over at McDonald's, he's probably gonna go to McDonald's or some other place, but he happens to really like working here, thankfully. But so we pay him $30 an hour. That's the TLDR for this, right? So that's a number where I figure, he's 19 years old. $30 an hour is pretty good.
I would have been stoked with that at that age. Yeah, for sure.
and he gets kind of running the place. I mean, we just sent him out. We just took delivery of a CO2 laser. Well, it's your machine, right? Here's a bandsaw. We need some work on it. Do the thing. And he's helping dialing in settings and helping with our software co-founder. Test all these parameters and all these use cases in the real world. So now you have myself. You have the co-founder who's a software guy, and you have this. Basically a machinist fabricator, just doing everything, right? Testing out our software and building. All that's to say, you got to pay them well enough so that at least that intrusive thought of, but this kind of sucks and I can get paid, right? Basically the same amount of money if just down the street with, less effort. You never want that to take place.
I had that thought many times over the year of like, I could quit today and go be a bartender and make more money than I'm making now. And like, if you have that, if your employee has the ability to have that thought, you're going to lose your employee at some point. Yeah. There's just, no way.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm not letting you off the hook. Let's go back to the shop.
Yep.
How did that all wrap up and why?
So we all know Jeff. So before, this is Yeti Man, right? So
yes.
before I moved to, so he's the one, I do need to give him credit for this. Before I moved from San Francisco to Emeryville, I didn't know anybody really on this side of the bay, as we call it. So, but I knew Jeff was based out here because I think at the time he was working at Carl Bass's shop. And so I said, hey man, I'm moving into Emeryville, would love to meet and greet. That's usually how I say it, right? If you'd love to meet and greet, cool. And Jeff's a super friendly person, as you know. So we do a meet and greet, become friends, and then he ended up, I guess, leaving the Carl shop and doing some other stuff, and you'd hear about him, pop up here and pop up there, and he's pretty tight with the Haas folks, the Selway folks, and so he's like, you buy a machine, there's Jeff if you want Jeff, right? That's usually how I associate him. I mean, super cool dude, right? Talented, etc. And so we have lunch one day. So I go to the city, we have lunch. He wouldn't tell me what he was working on or where he was. And as it turns out, so we go grab some euros or something like that. On the way back, he asks, hey, do you want to, I'm thinking of leaving this place. Do you want to join? And the company was Neuralink. And so I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. This, Elon aside, I like doing cool stuff and I like looking at the future and I want to be a part of that. And
this is like super early days too.
Yeah, this is when we were sharing office space with OpenAI in the city, which, by the way, was a block away from that coffee shop that I told you about where I first won that Fadal. So I'm telling you,
wild.
Dude, yeah, all these things
so
track.
Wild.
Yeah. And so we're standing at the corner. And now also, earlier on in my youth, let's say, I'm sure many kids as they're growing up, they just think, oh, I can do it myself, right? It's full of ego, full of vigor and all that stuff. Like, we talked about this. Like, you're going to tell me this, but I think I can do it my way and still get away with it, right?
I mean, that's literally why I have Protium, is because I was young and dumb and thought I can do it better than my bosses. So I'm living it. I feel it.
You're going to do it. Yeah, you're doing it. And when I had when I was working at this other internet marketing startup, the software company way back when, right? This is 97. I was at one of these conferences and I met up with, now owns a venture capital firm, but he at the time was a VP of business development at a company called eBay. Okay.
Oh, okay. Little company.
Little company. And he says, we're chatting it up over there and he says, hey, why don't you come work for us? And he starts talking about the stuff. And again, me being early 20s, I'm good, right? This is going to take off. And I think you need that. You need that kind of confidence and a little bit of stupidity and just naivety and all that. But I had many, I can count them more than on my two hands, where I didn't even entertain the offer, really, right? Of times when I was offered things and I'm like, yeah, I'm good. And so this time around, as we're standing there across the street, finishing up lunch, Jeff asks, and I said, yeah, fine. Let's talk to the recruiter. And I think that's probably a Friday, because the following day, I think it was a Saturday, I was at the shop and I get a call from the recruiter and basically interviewed for the job and took a while, yeah. And then January 2nd of 2018, I joined Neuralink. And I was still, by the way, paying the monthly payments on the machine, still paying the rent on the space. I basically just shut down shop and just started working at Neuralink. It was an interesting time.
So how long were you there? And then what was the next one?
I was there almost 4 years. So when I joined... Oh, wow.
You were there a lot longer than I thought.
Yeah, I was there, quite some time. I think I was still probably... Yeah, I wasn't super early. I mean, I count super early as, you're maybe under 10 so employees or something like that. They had already grown, a little bit beyond that, let's say. But they were still in San Francisco, shared office space with OpenAI. So we had great lunches talking about the, future of AI. And at least for me, manufacturing, how do you combine these two? In fact, one of their software engineers ended up going back to Germany and starting up a company doing AI machining, AI factory, basically. Interesting.
Cool.
Yeah, so I was there and I got hired on as really just the machinist, right? And Jeff was gone by then, and I started to, take over some of the parts that he'd started to introduce into the pipeline. I was working with the engineers. And we had a little Haas DT1, and it was there on a little wood. I think Jeff's probably talked about this, right? On a little wood floor in this old 1900s building in San Francisco. And a tiny little machine shop, and I'm there making parts and helping the engineers. And right around this time, prior to that, I found out about a company called Kern, Boomatech, Willem Macadel, like all the super fancy like machinery candy, right? Anyway, so I go to Neuralink and start working on parts, helping with the engineers. And I remember at that time this is 2018. We had already secured the new headquarters down in Fremont, California, and I knew exactly what I wanted because I love doing it and I've done it a couple of times. I know exactly what I want in the shop. Can't always afford it, but I know this kind of piping, this distributed this way. I want the disconnects over here, high gloss white epoxy floor. I mean, it's like same thing over and over again. And I was very specific about it, and I'd work with the architects and the planners there. And it seemed like we were moving too slowly, basically. So one day I volunteered myself to head up construction for the new office build and got the okay. And sure enough, very next day, I'm like, okay, well, let's accelerate. So for a better part of maybe 2+ years, I was making prototype parts, helping the engineers also, because we also didn't have all the capabilities. So I'm outsourcing a lot of stuff, trying to redirect and do triage, and also focusing on the high value stuff that basically no one would bid. These are truly no bid parts. And I tried very hard to get people to bid on some of these. And so there were certain times when I was running construction, running the machine shop, we're still building things out. I was working with the city of Fremont, working with the engineers, et cetera. And, construction schedule, right? 5:45, 5:30 in the morning, you run until 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Some folks are still there a little later. And I'm basically focused on that because, you're getting the push from Elon to hurry up and build it out. And everything is, you got to go faster and faster, which I generally like as well. And so after a typical construction day shift ends, that's when I start going to work on making parts. Okay. So there would be times I remember I'd finish up, so they leave and then I start getting, working on the prototype stuff, and I'd finish the first article. And by the way, we hadn't moved fully into Fremont yet. So the main headquarters was still in San Francisco proper, in the same office space I was talking about. And I used to live in the city. So I'd finish up the parts around 4 or 3 in the morning, something like that, and then drive back up to the city. It's about a 30-minute drive when there's no traffic. Deliver the parts, right? Nobody's there in the office, and I go home and maybe sleep for an hour or two. It didn't happen a lot, but it did happen enough times where it's like, oh my God, this is terrible, right?
That's rough.
Yeah, take a shower, take a quick nap, and go right back and meet the contractors and start my day over again. So it was a lot of that, but a lot of fun. Great people, super challenging what we're working on. Many things, as you can imagine, don't work. Right? Yeah. You just have to keep going after it.
Yep.
So almost 4 years in, I check LinkedIn one day and I get a message from a company called Atomic Machines, and that already sounded interesting. By the way, fun fact: there are at least three companies with atomic in it. There's Atomic Semi, super smart dude. This guy Sam. You have Atomic Industries, and then you have us, Atomic Machines. And the whole premise is, how do you make really small things at scale? Using economic equipment and some secret sauce, et cetera. And I went in there and executed the same playbook, which is, how do you build up a shop? How do you build up the original factory or the prototype lines for making these things? How do you work with the engineers? And the common theme here, by the way, is whether I was an external vendor as a machine shop or working internally at a Neuralink, Atomic Machines, presumably a lot of money, a lot of resources behind you, we still can fulfill all the parts, right? All the parts demands, requests. So not only that, but you typically, in these two organizations, you have your standard and design engineers, mechanical engineers, and then you have what I call the research scientists. These are the folks who come out of the labs or university academic departments, and these are the folks conducting experiments. And let me put it to you this way: like, we know McMaster, we probably use Grainger. We probably don't use this catalog called Thor Labs, but that's typically what they use, right? Optomechanical components, and it's just bracketry, basically.
I mean, you got to order from there every now and again because you got to get the snack box.
That's right.
Everybody wants that.
Everybody wants the snack box.
Yeah.
So they go ahead and, constantly they're coming to the engineers, are coming to me and asking for help. These are the scientists, the research people, and I'm happy to do it because I love it. But I also thought, well, this is odd. Like, none of this is getting solved. Right? We have all this really great software. We have Fusion. We have SolidWorks. Okay, some software you may not like, but I'm just going to name them. Right? You have the super expensive CAD software. You have the less expensive CAD software. You have the same with CAM, same with engineering. And bottom line is, you have these folks who still can't get a part. They can't ideate fast enough. They don't know how to communicate it. Like that to me just seems really broken. Why can't we give them the power to, certainly for simple stuff, you should be able to do this, especially in 2025, right? Give them a tool that lets them design, create the CAD file, and then better yet, create the manufacturing instructions that they can hand off to a machine shop, right?
Right.
And that's really the impetus for, I was 2.5 years into Atomic Machines, and I thought, well, I got to do something about this. This is driving me nuts, right? We're literally doing the same. We're constantly building better software without focusing on the pain points and the friction that's involved in doing all that, which is the workflow that matters. So,
okay. How do you know when it's the right time to move on? Because you've had all of these really amazing opportunities, your own shop and Neuralink, and what tells you that it's time to take the next opportunity?
I guess in today's parlance, it would be the intrusive thoughts. So,
okay,
whatever the motivation is, mine was, well, actually, to be fair, there's another part of it that, if I work for someone, it's very difficult to do, which is, in the restaurant analogy, I like to say there's front of house and back of house, and we're kind of back of house people in that, we're the chefs. We know how to operate the things and set up the menu and order the supplies, et cetera, and make the meal. But I also enjoy, as you can probably tell, I enjoy the front of house, which is the relationship building, understanding the problems, putting people together. I do a lot of that. By the way, fun fact, when I was at Neuralink, I've always wanted to tell this story, right? When I was at Neuralink, so this is 2018, I remember. So Tony comes over with Simon. We go to the Ferry building. We drink wine, eat oysters. We just have a meal, right? Dinner meal. We're sitting there at the bar, and I asked them, are you guys, how come you're not on Instagram, right? Because Instagram is a really powerful tool, especially for this type of craft, this type of trade. And, classic. They said, we'll get back to you. We'll talk to the marketing department. We'll do all this stuff. And I said, no. Before we leave here, I want the both of you guys to take out your phones, okay? And I want you guys to set up an Instagram account so the world can know how awesome your product is and how awesome you guys are. And so it was right then and there was the Current Micro Technique and then Current Precision. I can't remember which one is which now, but they both got them set up right then and there. And my claim to fame there is I was their first follower. And
that's amazing.
And this is the kind of thing, like, this is how I operate. You want to help people, right? Sometimes they're almost in their own way, like they can't, right? Oh, it's because we have to do this, we have to do that. And my take is, no, forget it. Let's just do it. We'll figure it out. Send
we'll
it.
ask for forgiveness.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. So people, super important. People.
Okay.
So you just have to know when it's, how do you know? When it's, when you have the intrusive thought in your head that says, you're aware of all these problems that exist, and clearly you're complaining enough about it, and you're smart enough, you have at least the willpower to do something about it. Doesn't mean you're going to be successful, but, there's only so much time on this planet. You might as well give it a go. Again, send it.
Okay. So, I like it. What about the converse of that? How do you avoid getting mired in the what ifs? Well, what if you had joined eBay? What if you had stayed at Neuralink? Like, I would imagine that with someone who has had so many opportunities presented, that it could be possible to constantly be stuck in that looking backwards.
Yeah, we had this opportunity to get bought. Very specific example. This one probably I think about more, but not too much. At the time, we had the startup that was making software for your cell phones and mobile phones before iPhone, all that. So again, I'm always looking at the future. And we met this one kid. He's probably, he's younger than me, I think. I remember driving into the parking lot, and not to say this is important, but I saw a Ferrari in the, whatever model it was. Okay. And I saw that, and it was his car, as it turns out. So I go up and talk to the guy and, do the standard meet and greet. And again, he says, listen, you guys have a pretty compelling software. I was focused on selling it to consumers, and he was focused on enterprises, which, by the way, is probably really that was the way to go. But he, we, through a couple conversations, he makes us an offer. He says, listen, why don't you just come join us, and we'll figure out, these details. And again, I'm good. We're going to figure this out. Right. And I think the important thing is to listen. Maybe that's it. Listen to your heart, listen to what your brain's saying. You probably won't have all the right answers, but if you never do anything about it, even knowing that in the past all these things happen and you're mired in these other kind of intrusive thoughts of the past, well, none of that you can change. It's already been done. And maybe the tactical advice here is just find yourself enough interesting things to focus on in the future that you don't think too far about the past or too much about the past.
Okay, I like that for sure. Well, let's get into some questions from the Patreon and Instagram. From the Patreon, Doug asks, from what you've experienced and observed, what are the top causes for a hardware startup failure?
Well, I only have an N of 2 example, or N of 2 sample. So if I were to project it at and if I were to compare that to what I typically see for many of the companies I do interact with out there who are not my N of 2 sample, we have a tendency to want to wait for a right answer. And I don't think there's ever really a right answer, except the right answer is the answer you get as quickly as possible, so you know what to do next. I'll share a quick story. I remember when Elon got on stage once, and he articulated in a way, it finally kind of made sense to me. Where he says, listen, you're talking to vendors all the time. And by the way, I used to do this before he said it, but it's like when he said it, just all of a sudden it clicked. He says, when you're talking to a vendor, typically they're going to focus on, they'll get you the quote, but it'll be on their timeline. It'll be tomorrow. Maybe they'll get back to you, maybe next week, worst case, right? But the week's already gone by, stuff's happened. You can't let that happen. So the thing to do is to really set other people on the time scale that you want to operate on. So what I did really tactically immediately after that was, when I'm talking to someone on the phone about getting a particular supply, and I'll say, hey, yeah, I'll expect, kind of tongue in cheek, right? So yeah, I'll expect a quote from you in 30 seconds after we get off a call. And it's a little bit, it's really just a signal to them that you're thinking on a different, not only a wavelength, but a time scale that they're probably not used to. And there have been times, actually at Neuralink, when I get off the phone, I'm talking to someone about the special kind of thing that we need, and I'm looking at the airline website, and I say, hey, I see a flight here coming, leaving SFO in 2 hours. I'll see you. I'll see you before close of business, right? Because I can't wait. And literally, I drive over, get on the plane. This is a short flight, right? Short haul. So I fly down to San Diego, as this one example is, and show up like 4:30 in the afternoon. Now he knows I'm serious, right? We need this thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think that's a great example. We have to do something similar, or not have to, but we do something similar with our anodizing house. Like they open at 5:30, and if I'm there at 5:30 with my parts, and I'm like, hey, I need same day expedite, they're like, okay,
yep,
we can do that. But if I show up at noon and they close at 3, they're like, yeah, okay, buddy, whatever. We'll see you in a couple days.
Totally.
So yeah, I completely agree. That's a great tip. Tux Garage asked, what's the biggest oversight most shops you've dealt with have?
Oversight. I would say it's their way of, every shop has a process, whether they know it or not. Pick quoting as a easy one to grasp. Everybody knows it's a problem. Everybody knows it takes time. And typically what happens is what I've observed, even to this day, I observe this, where you ask them to help you out with something, you give them some general parameters, and you're already thinking on their behalf. So I'm giving you as much information, thinking in the shop owner's perspective, what you're going to want from me. And I do my best to give you all that. And what ends up happening is they still defaulting to their normal, SOP basically. Well, I need to get this in order to get that, in order to get that. And everything is super serialized, as opposed to thinking that maybe some things can be parallelized and it's okay to not have the right answer. But again, the most important thing is to get an answer, and get an answer in a dialogue going with the person that you're talking with sooner than later.
Okay. I think that's great. His other question was, what is an often overlooked step for starting to use your software? So what are you seeing so far? You've had, a couple of months now on tool trace and rocket brackets. So this is actually a great time to get into what exactly does rocket brackets and tool trace do? Give us the lowdown. If I wanted to use either one today,
yep,
give me the end-to-end workflows.
Yeah, so it's for rocket brackets is for designing or creating digital files, simple sheet goods, where if you know CAD, as in cardboard aided design, not computer aided design, you know how to sketch something, you know how to take a picture with your phone of something that exists in the real world that's flat, then you should be able to, just from that very simple interaction, create a digital file that a machine shop such as yours or mine, or Sencut Sen as an example, or Oshcut or any of these folks can then further process for you. Tool trace, again, these are all examples of what the fundamental underlying software does. So that's one example. So generate 2D CAD files, also 3D. We do step files as well. And then tool trace it's just something that has bothered me since day one. I mentioned, when I used to have my own shop, my own kind of hobby shop, everything was just a super mess. I like things that are I do believe it or not, like things that are organized. I like trays when you pull them out, every tool's in its place. But creating the actual file to cut those foam inserts out or what have you is a royal pain. If you probably.
Oh yeah, it's terrible.
It's terrible. And Kaizen foam, I guess shout out to FastCap and Paul Akers, right? It's great for having at least something that gets you in the zone of being able to do it. But then, after plucking out enough with your finger and it gets all silvery and you're still doing this over and over again for every tray, and you have to change it like that. It gets us halfway there, but it doesn't really solve the problem of reducing the amount of friction it takes to, again, get the digital file that someone can use to cut out the thing. So that's the whole point of tool trace, is to demonstrate that, hey, with the software currently, with our software and also with some of the advancements in AI and computer vision, et cetera, you can actually very quickly do these things that have typically required an engineer, machinist, CAD programmer.
So how does this work when you are spinning up all of these micro brands? Are you looking to see if one of them hits, or is this just further advancing your technology, and down the line Brittle Fluid will have like its quote unquote mature product? Like, how do you view these experiments?
Yeah, these experiments, they're fast experiments that sit on top of this core infrastructure that in the future other shops, not only ours, can use. What that means is if, there are plenty of laser shops. Lasers, by the way, are getting super cheap. Many of them come from China. Super cheap CO2, fiber lasers, what have you. So the equipment is abundant, is my point. And then with that is going to come more folks getting into the game. And then the thing that still lacks there is the software that lets them drive these machines. EasyCAD, Lightburn. I mean, Lightburn's great, but relatively compared to EasyCAD. But you still have to find someone who understands the CAD. You still have the same problem again, where someone has an idea. How do they communicate that idea to you? And so our take is, why don't we just give you all these tools that you can choose a la carte, that are self-service, that are revenue generating from day one? So you have a laser. Guess what? You can actually sell tool foam. Like that's a known problem. And if you're down the street from some of these hardware companies, or Joe's Garage or whatever it is, and now all of a sudden you have a way to generate revenue that takes very little effort from you to offer it up to your customers. Now they can send you the file and do all these things. Your in the case of rocket brackets, right? Again, creating a digital file is typically a thing. It's a little easier with 2D files, but now you can make it easy and make it more accessible to the general public. Because everybody has a cell phone, everybody knows how to take pictures. So what do you do with that picture to relay that message into a digital file that we can use?
Gotcha. Okay. So does that extend to where you see people building apps on top of your technology? Like, Joanne says like, well, I want to create custom storage solutions for kitchens and like use the Brittle Fluid technology to do that. Like, is that where you envision this going as well?
Yes, absolutely. Think of it as we produce tools that our customers can think of it. We're basically the manufacturing Legos, right? You need a computer vision type of tool to do a certain type of thing. You need a thing that has outlines. You need a thing to communicate directly with your lasers. We've all figured out these interconnects. And then what you do is you go to our platform and say, well, I want to actually do a thing that does this and that. And you kind of like Zapier, right? You just connect this, or if then that, connect this to that. And again, it's like no code or very low code. You don't have to be a programmer. It's all basically been done. You connect those two, and that becomes an app that you can deploy on your own website. So now you're Joanne's laser shop, and now I can do signs, I can engrave coins, whatever. I can engrave things. And then you can bypass all the traditional CAD workflows, and you can, to some degree, bypass some of the the equipment control workflows as well, like literally straight from your phone to the thing.
Awesome. So you mentioned coins again, and that brings up Sean Connor's question from Instagram. You have a Williman.
Yeah.
How's the Williman doing? Did you buy that more of just like, I've always wanted one of these amazing mill turns, and also now I can technically throw a business case at it? Or how did that come about? And then his other question was plans for a bigger shop. So let's get into all that.
Yeah, the Williman, I have not actually used the Willy in at least a couple months. I literally haven't even turned it on. We've been busy building out the shop. Physically, I like to joke that we're in a 420 square foot shop, but that's actually pretty accurate. So we're in a tiny little shared warehouse space, wedged. I'm looking out here. In order to go from Where I am now is a self-constructed phone booth to the outside shared hallway. You're basically doing a crab walk.
Oh, wow.
It's tight.
Okay.
It's tight. We have CO2 laser. We have our little water jet. We have a fiber, the engraver, Bridgeport. Everybody has to have a Bridgeport or something similar. And there's a whole lot of other equipment that we need to really use to test out our software to prove things out. And there's another thing I didn't mention earlier, which is I have really strong conviction that it's important to be able to. For example, I won't go to your shop and try to sell you something unless I know it works on my own equipment.
I appreciate that.
Full stop. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of makes sense.
We all can appreciate that for sure.
So it also helps that I like equipment, but the main point is I want to make sure that it works here before I offer anything to you, right? And so the Wilhelm is part of this. But to answer your question specifically, yeah, I've always wanted a Wilhelm. It happened to be right then and there at the right time. And so one of the earlier MVPs that I created to demonstrate this workflow of from your phone or from something web-based all the way to a cycle start on your machine. I thought, well, maybe we'll create AI generated jewelry. So auto design, some parameters around it, but you use AI, you tell it some stuff. A 2D image gets generated using chat. From that, we do some manipulation to turn it into 3D space or a 3D digital file. Then it goes into Fusion 360, and then automatically does the camming. Shout out to Pete, by the way. He did try to help with some of the direct connect into the Fanuc 16i. Very challenging. Suffice it to say, we're not using that. Not working. Not because of him. It's like Fanuc is very interesting, or Fanuc, however you want to pronounce it.
Yeah. Especially the older you get, it doesn't get any better. It's not like wine. It's not getting better with age.
No.
So is it a 408?
It's a 408 MT. Yeah. Is
okay.
That right? Yeah.
That sounds right. Yeah. Very cool. And so plans for a bigger shop? Was his other questions?
Yeah, we're looking at 10x. So basically, kind of the 4,000 plus, maybe 5 to 10,000 if we can have it our way. Shop space probably back where I started, back in Emeryville.
No way.
Ironically, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, what I want to do is for all the flat stuff, I want to have the largest CO2 laser you can get, the largest fiber laser you can get, with some level of automation. The largest water jet we can have, because we're constantly, even today, I'm sending out parts to my friends' shops because we can't process them because our machines are too small, right? I mean, it's like,
right.
What are we doing here?
You're trying. You're learning.
We're doing it. We're trying. And so I want to be able to the general thought is get a large enough space where we can also share some of the space inside for hardware companies, whether they're, investor money or, bootstrap or what have you. They're making something. And going back to the point of wanting to dog food and prove out our own software before we, ship it out to the public, it helps if we have a captive audience of folks who can use our machines, right? We'll be the ones doing the work, but we make the parts. They give us the requirements. We, get this tighter feedback loop going. We build our software better. And if we can do that, then I have confidence that we can actually help build effectively this kind of, an industrial shop of the future, if you will. Mm-hmm.
That's really cool. So it'll be like a hardware accelerator plus, like you said, a captive audience proving ground all in one.
Yeah. And software first, I should say. We have equipment, but the core focus, I think that's going to help us towards the future is I'm happy to be the, part of the solution where we help create software tools that the actual machine shops want, not the ones that we think the machine shops want. You tell us what you want, we'll see if we can develop something that helps, right? And then deploy it on your site.
Awesome. That is super cool. Well, we've got two other questions from Instagram. They're both pretty close to each other. Dan Rudolph asked, what color gloves would you wear if you wore gloves in a picture?
Yeah.
And IGS Dan from Kern and now from InnoLight said, haikus and orange gloves. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, haikus are an interesting mode of conveying messages. Probably takes a little more work. I have to sit down with a notepad and do it. As far as the color of gloves, let's see. I mean, you see a lot of blue and black. You don't see a lot of orange. You don't see a lot of, different colors, right? Maybe purple. I guess you see a lot of purple. But I'm more partial to, the adventurous colors, let's say.
Yeah, that sounds right. All right, that brings us on to shop news and new things. Besides your two new companies, any other news or new things in your world?
Yeah, I'm doing, context switching is, as you know, is always a thing. And so I'm constantly, especially lately in the past couple of months, going from 30,000 feet all the way down boots on the ground, just cycling back and forth. And
You brought up a very interesting point there, 30,000 feet to boots on the ground, because you quite literally do that. I mean, for the entire time I've known you, you probably travel more than almost anybody in the Instant Machinist community. So how do you balance travel with being productive? Because you also get shit done.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you do it, like, especially during IMTS season and all of that. Like, I think I saw you at IMTS and you're like, yeah, I'm off to Jim Toff and then I'm off to this. And then, how do you get it all done while you're jet setting around?
Wi-Fi on planes is a big deal. It's huge. I kid you not. We've actually written apps and tested our work while on the plane. A little slower, but it works. So I'm very thankful for that. The other thing is, relationships matter and showing up matters. I think that's a while ago we were talking about, kind of like the maybe personal MO, et cetera. When you show up, people know that there's seriousness around it. I mean, I'm kind of stating the obvious here, right? But it is people, I think people tend to forget that. So your example of showing up at the anodizers, 5 a.m. Oh, absolutely. The moment you show up, they know you're serious.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's really important to also have, to see what's happening more from a macro level, right? What are certain countries talking and thinking about? You go to AMB last year, Germany, the Germans were talking about the state of affairs, the economy, what's happening with the auto industry. How does that impact downstream everything that we're working on, or collectively as a whole? What are people worried about? Right? I mean, we're literally all floating around in this singular rock. We should help each other, right? We should have more understanding, more compassion, just help each other. And so the only way to do that is to, set some of that ego down, open up, it's going to sound a little, open up your heart, open up your ears, open up your eyes, and just listen and pay attention. And then where you can offer assistance and help, you should do it.
I love that. Yeah. Well, what do you get out of going to see shops? Like, you came by my shop and when you told me, you're like, hey, I'm going to be in Tucson and I want to come by, I was like, why?
Why?
Like, sure, you're more than welcome, but why? So what do you get out of shop visits, like coming to see my shop?
Well, the very practical one is that shop vac, that Milwaukee canister backpack thing has to go.
It's great for certain things.
I'm sure it is.
But we use the one you got us much more for what it's meant to be for now.
Yeah. So what I get out of visiting you as an example is I want to see how you do things, right? We all do things differently. It's these little things during shop visits that maybe for me at least, I'm not asking all the questions I can, but again, I'm a visual learner. So when I see what you're doing, I start putting the pieces together and then I ask you a question, and that helps make me be a better machinist, human. It's, all the above. And I think it's also, it's part of just supporting, when I show up, regardless of what you think of me, as a human being, just someone else being there right next to you and saying, hey, if there's anything you need, you let me know. I'm going to help you. I think we need more of that, and I have no objective other than just, hey, you're doing cool stuff, man. I want to support you.
Yeah, we loved having you by, but it was definitely a head scratcher to start the day. It's like, but why? Sure, but yeah. No, it was great having you out. We really appreciated it, and we appreciate the shop vac. Yeah. All right, we are down to the last questions that I ask every guest every week. First up is one CAM, metrology, or business tip or trick that helped you this week.
CAM, metrology, business tip or trick. I've been spending a lot of energy. I don't think this doesn't really answer any of those questions. I've been heads down on this galvo fiber laser marker that we have, and trying to understand, from more of a physics level, like sounds a little crazy, but how do lasers work? How do we optimize things for certain types of materials, for certain types of cuts? I mean, I'm literally in the weeds trying to understand how this machine works. My tip there is it's really easy to go online and try to find a YouTube video or some resource and pattern match what they're doing and apply it to what you're doing. And I think the real lesson here is, while that's okay, I'm not saying don't do it, you still have to fundamentally ask yourself the question, how does all this stuff actually work? Because then you can start thinking for yourself and making your own decisions.
Okay. So like specifically when you were looking into this fiber laser, what are the things that you learned about how it fundamentally works that are going to change the way that you do business?
As far as business, I'm not entirely sure.
Or I mean, your business though, like how did that inform your app or your offerings?
Yeah, it's that while it's really easy to think like software is going to magically solve all the problems, there are a lot of, even in very specific workflows, there are all these little toggles and little parameters that do matter. And it's in the nuances that software, I don't think, can pick up right now. Maybe in the future with enough data, with enough training, et cetera, you can make more guided decisions. But right now, if I were to say, I just want to laser mark this thing, or I want to cut this particular piece of stainless steel and do it in this way using this one particular recipe, it doesn't actually quite work like that. There's too many conditions involved. So, again, I think actually, this is the real lesson. This is the biggest lesson. So okay. we've been on this call for almost 2 hours, right? The biggest lesson is how to tell a story. That transcends all.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I've said it a few times recently that I think that the human aspect is the most important part of any business. Like someone always is going to do it better or cheaper, faster than you. So it is how you make those connections and how you tell your story that really matters. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the story is king. I had my co-founder tell me what we were working on. It created a nice slide deck and everything. And I kid you not, I mean, I was grasping onto the first 10 seconds of what he said, and everything else just evaporated. And so the lesson that I need to practice is also that of storytelling, right? There are certain things that matter to tell. Everything else, people are just going to forget.
Yeah, right? Well, it's really hard when you're passionate too. Like I find I'm very much, you get me off on the right topic, and it's like I'll talk your ear off for 5 hours, no problem, and I won't remember it. And it's like, no, I need to make it concise and interesting and remember my listener and all of that.
Oh my God.
It's a little tough sometimes.
Yeah,
for sure.
Case in point, man.
All right. Well, next up, what challenge are you facing and where are you looking for help?
Challenge I'm facing right now is we need more resources on the software we're developing. We are spread pretty thin with all the various ideas and the actual software that we're building. And the important thing is to check ourselves every once in a while and make sure we're not spending a lot of resource into something that actually doesn't matter at the end of the day right now. So basically, it's just resource management, time management. When I met my co-founder, one of the first things we did on that 1 hour Zoom call was I asked him if he'd be willing to take at least one of the self-assessment frameworks out there. You've heard of Myers-Briggs, probably. Mm-hmm. So we did Myers-Briggs. We did a thing called 34 Clifton Strengths. We did an Enneagram.
Clifton Strengths.
Oh, yep. So I want to talk to you about that. And it was super interesting that how I'm talking and the way I'm doing things right now is very it is exactly what the self-assessment frameworks. Now I'm going off topic. You should
no. Keep it in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's important to know how you operate, basically, right? And the frameworks only give you. It's not the end all, but it is a starting point where you can understand better how you operate under certain conditions. And then same with the co-founder, how he operates under certain conditions. And then now we have a common language. So it's no surprise that, as you've probably have evidenced in this conversation, I have a tendency to bounce around. I have all these ideas and all these stories I'd love to tell. We didn't even have time to go through all this. And that's how I typically operate. And then for him, he's just like a hammer. He just wants to execute. But the good news is we know that about each other. And so we play very well off of each other, right? So I'm going out there with ideas. He's just looking for a game plan. What are we doing? What are we doing? So when we check back with each other and we have this conversation, now we know we're building something with a lot of force, with a lot of speed in a direction that is actually pushing the future of manufacturing the way that we see it, right?
That's great. Yeah, it sounds like a really good partnership there, where you can very quickly talk through 30 ideas, and then he's like, all right, I heard 5 that are good. Let's start going after those,
Yeah.
Like that's great. Yeah. No, I went through the Clifton strengths at my last job. They did for the entire engineering team, and it was very interesting. Yeah.
Oh, so I want to compare notes.
Okay. Yeah, for sure.
Seriously.
No, I'm totally down. Next up, work-life balance. What does it mean to you, and how do you manage it? And is it any different from 5 or 10 years ago?
Generally, I like to work, and people understand that about me. They don't always like it that I like to work so much. How I balance it is I have to constantly remind myself. I have this internal clock that I feel as though I'm always behind. And I'm sure that started since day 0, right? Certainly 0 to 5, always behind. And I'm not getting enough information. It's basically, I feel like there's this lack of. And in the context of working and where I want to be in my career and all, I constantly feel as I'm behind. And so the thing also to remember is that there is actually more to life than just working. There are relationships and people. Spending 2 hours talking with you is very enjoyable. We should do more of that.
Yeah.
And it is okay to not. It is okay to actually spend a lot of time, or at least allocate some time to think about the very. It is okay to feel as though you're walking. Maybe that's the period right there. Just feel as though it's okay to walk.
Yes. Yeah. That is something I struggle with myself. My wife has on more than one occasion said, why isn't it just good enough sometimes? Like, why are you always striving for the next thing? And it's like, that's just who I am.
Yeah.
I do have to, as cliche as it is, stop and smell the roses sometimes. Like, it is nice to have that reminder of like, you know what? You can still have that drive in the background, but sometimes it's okay to just enjoy the moment and focus on the moment.
Maybe that is part of this. Now sounds like a therapy session, right? Maybe that is part of the travels, is that when you can't control the plane schedule. You just show up, how early, and that's all up to you, but you show up and then you wait.
Right.
Then you get on the plane and you wait some more.
Yeah, right? That's true. Yeah. Yeah. You're locked in the metal tube, whether you want to or not, for a couple hours. Yeah. I like that.
But, again, then I find Wi-Fi and then I'm constantly like, so.
All right. Last one. Second to last one. What thing that doesn't really pencil out that you've bought that you wouldn't be without just for the reduced aggravation, fatigue, or aversion?
Well, I'm looking at a recent purchase, but actually that's counter to your question. So
it's something that you would not have bought again?
So I bought a Bridgeport with an AccuRite mill power 2 control. So CNC, DRO, all that good stuff. It shows up. And I'm the one who drove the control, by the way. So 30 minutes, of driving on the freeway, get back, plug it in, no power.
Oh, no.
So I'm thinking, all right, well, maybe now's the time to really focus on or learn electrical board component troubleshooting. I mean, is it really? I think I have other stuff to do. And so, I call up a couple places, you're $500, $800 to replace this board. Now, it's just a power supply, mind you. It's only a switching power supply. You can buy those things pretty damn cheap on Amazon, if that. And I'm thinking, well, I'm going to go ahead and start doing this thing. So I buy a soldering iron, buy a heat gun, buy all the stuff, everything from Amazon. But I'm buying all these things. I'm replacing chips, replacing capacitors, never mind the time that's going into it, right? And I appreciate the learning, but it feels like I'm, number one, learning too slowly. But really to answer your question, or maybe the opposite of your question, I probably should have just paid someone or just paid $800. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it also revealed something that speaks to our industry, which is try to find a PCB repair shop.
Oh yeah.
Good luck.
Uh-huh. Yeah, they're near impossible to find.
Yeah.
Same with like a computer repair shop.
Yep.
Like, good luck. You might have to find one in a strip mall somewhere. Like, but that's it. Yeah, they're near about gone.
Yeah, it's sad, and maybe circling back to the very beginning, maybe this is instead of reminiscing on the golden age where I can walk into a Radio Shack and buy the components and do all this stuff. Maybe that is gone forever, and maybe the thing to do is just accept that. Dare I say it. Maybe just accept that is forever the way it's going to be here in the States and probably even get worse. Now the next question is there a way to support what remains? That's important. So don't turn your back on them, but support what remains in the best way you can, and then start building the new future that you want to see. And then somewhere in between these 2 points will coalesce into something into the future that we actually wanted.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's. I think anybody would say, like, yes, I would love to live in a time where I could go get something repaired. But then most of those people, if they saw what a repair bill would cost, would say, you know what? I think I'm just going to buy new.
Yeah.
And I'm fully included in that. There have been things where I'm like, oh, I'll repair it. I'll buy the parts for it. And it's a $200 item. And I look up the parts and it's $120 in parts. And I'm like, I'll just buy another one. Never mind. Why would I do this?
Yeah.
And it's tough. It's tough to live in a throwaway time as a manufacturer, I think.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, so to get back to the question, is there anything that you travel with that you would not be without?
What do I travel with that I can't be without? No, I actually, my travel, my philosophy is very simple, which is you need an ID and you need a way to pay for stuff. So going back to the throwaway comment, I mean, everything basically looks, for the most part, fairly westernized now. I mean, they're obviously not everything, but if I show up somewhere and I don't have, I don't have pants or jacket or whatever, you could just go buy it.
Right.
So the 2 things I can't live without, clearly ID, and then at least some way of paying for something.
Okay.
Probably a terrible answer. Maybe I should have said Space Mouse, right? I mean, used one of those in a while.
Yeah, I'm sure you travel all over with that. You can't be without it.
Dude, those are heavy, but they're great. I'm a firm believer in Space Mice.
I just bought another one. I haven't had one for years, and I just bought another one and really am enjoying it. But
did you get the puck for the?
I bought the Pro one without the screen.
Okay.
And I like it a lot. Actually, funny quick story about Space Mice. I went to AU in 2018, maybe. It was the year that they were making the little like environmental sensor in the factory there. And that thing was like full of, wires, and it's all soldered together and looks like, like a homemade environmental sensor.
Yeah. And
I'm going through the Vegas airport, and they lost their minds over my Space Mouse, like pulled me into secondary inspection, and were looking at it and questioning me about it. Meanwhile, there is like a very bomb-looking environmental sensor in my backpack that they could not care about.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, that thing with a bunch of loose wires in it, whatever. But like this consumer good, no, we need to talk to you about it.
That's funny.
Yeah. All right. Last question. What have you been researching this week? Doesn't have to be manufacturing related. It is just always interesting to hear what interesting people are looking into.
Well, this particular one, cutting really thin stainless on a fiber laser, little galvo fiber laser, basically an engraving machine. And then the physics behind that, I'd say that's part. Oh, actually, the one that's really consuming my mind, actually more than anything else, is back to this power supply. I just seriously,
Haven't cracked that nut yet, huh?
no. I mean, you would think it should not be that complicated, and I think this is also like it's a learning thing. So I've already replaced all the big capacitors at least. I've done all the basic troubleshooting. And by the way, chat, really good tool. Identify your component, tell me more about it, and it'll give you the troubleshooting steps. Pretty amazing. Um, yeah, so I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos. So going back to the pattern matching, watching a lot of YouTube videos, actually trying to getting myself in the practice of being comfortable, literally desoldering and then resoldering components on the board. That's been interesting. It kind of harkens back to the very early days of machining for me. It's like, oh, do I press this? Do I do this? I don't have the muscle memory or the context for it yet. So a lot of research in that, like how delicate do I have to be? Does this ohmmeter do it, or does this digital multimeter do it this way? Like, what do I need? How come it's reading this way? Tell me more about circuitry, all that. So a deep dive, practical, hands-on lesson in board repair.
Okay. Hopefully you have a good soldering iron. Nothing is more frustrating than a crappy soldering iron.
Well, I bought a crappy soldering iron off of Amazon. I knew better, but
Oh yeah, I have spent far too long trying to fix things with a crappy soldering iron, only to like finally give up, buy like a nicer one, and go, oh, this took me 10 seconds.
Oh my God.
Cool. All right.
What did you buy, by the way?
I have a Paco that I really like. And then I just maybe 8 months ago bought one of the Pine Souls, the little.
Okay.
They're USB-C powered, so you can even power them from like a battery bank.
Oh, wow.
And they have a OS built into them, so they heat up super quick. They have like not drop protection, but like if I put it down, it knows that it's not in my hand anymore and immediately cools off. You can change the ramp, you can change all that stuff, and it fits in like a little travel case, so you can technically travel with it pretty easily.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's really neat. But yeah, I've suffered through enough terrible soldering irons to finally invest in one,
dude. And isn't it funny that it's just like human nature? We've seen going back to the machining world, we've seen enough machine shops where people starting off a machine shop from ground zero. And they invariably do make this, what I would call mistakes, the same mistakes that we made when we first started. You buy this because it's cheap. You buy this because of X, Y, and Z, without thinking, a little bit more, solves a huge problem, headache's gone, right? And just the daily interaction with these things, the fit and finish, all that stuff, just it feels a whole lot better using the tool, right?
Oh yeah. Well, it goes back to what you said in the beginning, the friction. Like you really pay to remove that friction, and when you do, you're just like, oh, yeah, this is so much better. How did I live like this before?
Yeah.
And it's every little thing. Like Brad and I constantly are thinking back to our first shop, because it's only now that we have so much light, and like we put in so much light in our old shop. We were like, how did we machine in that dark cave? And it's just the little things like that where, we lived with it for probably 2 or 3 years. Like we would open the bay door so we had enough light to machine by, because the terrible fluorescents were just not enough.
Yeah.
And by the time we left there, I think we had hung, 10 or 15 plug-in LED bars. We had LED retrofit the rest of the fluorescents. And like, it still was dark, but it was way better than it was.
Yep.
And had we done that from the beginning, like, everything would have been easier. We would have been able to see what we were doing. And
kind of important. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So it's that friction for sure.
Yeah. People are funny, man. People are funny.
Yeah. Well, Dave, thank you so much. Please let us know where we can find you online, all your companies, everything.
Yeah. I mean, I think the easiest right now, I'm spending a lot of time on X. So it's just David Liu XYZ. Just start there.
Okay, great. And then your companies, where can we, if we want to buy, rocket brackets and foam, where do we go?
Yeah. So, rocketbrackets.com. You want to do tool foam for your trays or anything, organically shaped, go to tooltrace.com. You want to make a challenge coin that's laser engraved, deep laser engraved. Just go to coinmaker.ai. Just remember, these are all just examples of the underlying thing that we're working on.
Right. So get them now while you can.
Yeah, right. Seriously.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Well, again, thank you so much. Like you said, we've got, I feel like, a ton more stories to dive into. So we'll just have to do this again in the future.
Yeah. Sounds good.
And thanks to all the Patreon members who make this show possible. New ones, Mark and Ivraj. Thank you for joining the Patreon. Lets me send people like Dave a mic and headset and camera so you guys can hear and see us.
Yeah.
And thank you all for listening. And I will be back next week.